in a town where whispers roam. A wolf-turned man found a place called home. Sunlight streams through the window pane. A cozy bookstore where magic reigns. Pages turn with every heart's desire, filling the air with tales that inspire. By day it's quiet, the world feels still, but as dusk falls, it's time for the thrill. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. He weaves the stories of distant lands, with creatures that play in the palm of his hands. The whispers of legends fill the room. From dragons to dreamers, the shadows bloom. In the laughter we forget our fears, sharing our hopes, the dreams of our years. The flicker of candles, the warm glow inside. In the embrace of tales we let love guide. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. We dive into realms.
And that song is louder than I remember it being. Well, longer anyway. Elvis's last number one was Suspicious Minds. I did not know that. But yes, it is Thursday. That sound is still there. Oh well. I hope everyone is doing good this evening. And we are going to be reading more of The Mummy. Let's see, which chapter are we on? We're on 26 of 32. So, 2 or 3 more weeks left of this book. I've got another book to read after this. But it's going to be leaning more back to folklore. But it's not stories per se, but history. Because I have found a copy of the Commonwealth of Elves, Fairies, and I can't remember what the third one is. That is originally from, I think, 1619. I have a remade version of it that was written, well, published by Andrew Lang with his notes in it. But it is supposedly one that could get me sent back to the Pharaoh. So, if I vanish after I finish it, you'll know what happened. Because apparently the priest who wrote it... Yep, why am I so high on the screen? Okay. But the priest that wrote it apparently went to a fairy mound and was taken prisoner. And he showed up at a friend's christening after he had given instructions on how to bring him back. And the guy didn't do it, and he was never seen again. So yeah, I'm going to start reading that book when I finish The Mummy. So it'll be interesting. Again, if I vanish, you know what happened. Or if my ghost appears at the christening of someone, feel free to throw an iron blade over my head, and that will hopefully bring me back. But we'll have to find out until then. Okay, give me one moment, we'll get started. Okay. Pretty sure no one wanted to hear me blow my nose. I'd hope not. Not something you usually get on an ASMR request. So let's get into the book. Chapter 26. Whilst these scenes were taking place in Spain, Elvira was beginning to discover, in England, that it was not quite so delightful to be a queen as she had previously imagined. The contending parties in the state had been roused into action by the late struggle, and the party spirit is of all others the most difficult to conquer. Besides this, the choice of Elvira having been rather a matter of feeling than of judgment, men felt dissatisfied at having suffered themselves to be hurried away by their passions, and, as is usual in such cases, they were disposed to vent ill humor they felt at their own conduct upon everything which chanced to fall in their way. Thus, even the best measures of Elvira's government were warmly criticized, and as she unfortunately altered some of her laws in consequence of these objections, the critics were encouraged to proceed, and fancying her plans to be the result of weakness, when they were in fact only produced by her natural candor and love of justice, the people became more outrageous and troublesome with every concession that was made to them. Elvira's intentions were excellent, but by unfortunately wishing to please everyone, she destroyed their effect. This made her counsels vacillating and her measures uncertain. Nothing indeed but the strength of mind and the commanding genius of Edmund, joined to his complete devotion to her cause, could have prevented the ruin of her government almost in the moment of its formation. From a mistaken motive of generosity, she had retained in her council those lords who had most vehemently opposed her, though, in compliance with the wishes of Edmund, they are shorn off their beams. This was a fatal error. Half measures are always dangerous. The lords in question should have been discarded altogether, or retained in their former seats. As it was, Elvira had made them enemies, and yet left them the power to sting her. The emissaries of Rosabella were also very active, and the ferment of the public mind excessive. The taste the people had just enjoyed of power had only been enough to make them long for more. They had only just begun to relish its sweets when the dish was snatched away from them, with which, if it had been left to them to devour, they would have been soon cloyed. Discontents became general, disturbances arose, which were no sooner quelled in one quarter than they broke out in another, and these petty insurrections, though almost too trivial to mention, were excessively annoying. For trifling inconveniences, like the host of flies buzzing around a nervous man on a sultry day, are often more irritating to the temper than the serious grievances, and the noble mind of Edmund was wearied by subduing such paltry entreaties. "They want employment," he said one day to the Queen, after reading a dispatch containing an account of one of the more vexatious of these tumults. "You must build bridges and cut canals to amuse them." The active mind of Elvira caught eagerly at the idea, and she vainly fancied her name would be handed down in posterity as one of the greatest of queens, who, though in the bloom of youth and pride of beauty, did not hesitate to sacrifice herself for the good of her people, and to devote that time to their welfare and the improvement of her kingdom, which others of her age and rank wasted in mere amusements. Delighted with the thought, Elvira did not delay a moment before she prepared to put it in practice, and she was found for several days together constantly surrounded by her counselors, and seated at a table absolutely loaded with papers, which she was busily employed in inspecting and arranging. Plans for the erection of public buildings, for hospitals, bridges, museums, and churches, schemes for new manufactories, hints of new establishments conducive to the general good, and sketches of new discoveries lay in heaps before her, mixed with addresses of compliments, votes of thanks, complaints of grievances, petitions, secret informations, and in short all that multifarious collection of paper with which a monarch is sure to be surrounded who is said to be anxious to ameliorate her condition of the people, and who is unhappily reported to possess a genius for improvement. Unfortunate is the man possessed of power, of whom such reports are current. He is directly surrounded by projectors, each presenting a scheme more futile than that of his predecessor, and discontented dependents, each bringing a long list of grievances, half of which are imaginary, but which have been conjured up by the complaints that they might lose their precious rights they enjoy of complaining. Unhappy he whose fate obliges him to decide between the rival claimants, certain alike to be blamed if he give or refuse, if he accept or if he reject. Elvira had not yet found the evils of power, but she now tasted of its sweets and was enchanted. It seemed to her the most delightful thing in the world to hold in her hands the destinies of thousands of her fellow creatures, and she thought not of the heavy responsibility it entailed, nor how often her path would be followed by curses instead of blessings. Someone has said that every time a sovereign confers a favor, he makes one ungrateful subject and 9 discontented ones, but Elvira and Edmund had not yet discovered the truth of this maxim. Since their present plan had been suggested, everything with them had been a couleur de rose. I say them, for Edmund was associated with Elvira in all these gigantic schemes of improvement, and as he had conceived the very first idea of them, so it was he only who could carry them into execution. His active mind required something to employ it, and the same strong feelings which had formerly been devoted to love and glory were now turned into another channel. The energies of Elvira's mind had also been awakened by the struggle for the crown, and the passion awakened in her breast by the youthful stranger, and now she felt that she could not quietly return again to the commonplace stillness of everyday life. The passions, when once roused from their dormant state, must have something to occupy them, or they will prey upon themselves. Thus, we generally see great warriors or statesmen, or in fact any class of men who have passed their lives in activity, wither away when forced to the dullness of an obscure retirement. Their minds and bodies decay alike from want of stimulants to call them into action. The improvement of her people supplied the stimulus to the mind of Elvira, but alas, she entered upon it rather with passion than judgment, and had not patience to wait to see her plans gradually carried into effect. No, no, she could not endure anything slow. With her, everything must be done at a coup de main, and as people in the buildings are so stupid as not to be made perfect by the first attempt, she was continually disappointed and discouraged. In fact, by attempting to do too much, she did nothing. When Elvira ascended the throne, she determined no public act should take place without the approbation of her council, and these noble lords were one day debating upon a propriety of a new road that was supposed to intersect the entire kingdom at right angles, when Lord Gustavus de Montfort rose to oppose it, upon the ground of the injury it would do to private property if carried into effect. Elvira could not endure Lord Gustavus. His cold, prudent, calculating manner, without a single spark of imagination, disgusted her beyond description, and the only good quality he possessed, that of being indefatigable when following up to his point, completed her abhorrence. Wit and eloquence were quite thrown away upon him, for he understood neither the one nor the other, and when any new or brilliant scheme crossed Elvira's imagination, and she described it to her council with all the fire of genius and animation, there he sate with his calm, cold, unvarying countenance, ready to damp it with a doubt. Lord Maysweather was also her aversion. His narrow mind, which could only take in such trifles as escape the observation of men of genius, his mean and paltry spirit, and his grovelling ambition, were all her detestation, whilst Lord Noodle and Lord Doodle, who, though crimpers in themselves, yet, like their prototypes, prodigiously increased the weight of the figures placed before them, completed the group. Much, however, as Elvira disliked these members of her council, she felt unequal to resist their combined influence, and she was just upon the point of being teased into their opinions contrary to her own judgment, when Lord Edmund entered the room. Indescribable was the effect produced by his presence, for indeed his commanding talents swayed all of them and before Elvira could even help smiling when she saw her counselors in the state shake their wise heads and imagine they were assisting to the debate with their wisdom, whilst, in fact, they were mere tools in his powerful hands. It is true they were agents that produced the intended effect, but his was the master spirit that set them in motion, and taught them where to go. His powerful intellect caught in an instant the comparative merits and disadvantages of the plan now in discussion, and his nod decided its fate. The council, however, though they implicitly obeyed his will, had not the least idea that they were doing so, as he had the address so his form of opinions as to let each person imagine them the suggestions of their own breast. Whilst the principal personages in the cabinet, fancying they were leading, were thus blindly led, the nonnities of course followed in their train, and our old friends the lords of ancient family were perfectly astonished when they heard the magnificent plans and sagacious counsels attributed to them, and sate quite lost in admiration of their own wisdom, whilst their little heads and enormous periwigs kept bobbing with at least threefold their accustomed rapidity. Elvira's ascension to the throne had induced both her father and Sir Ambrose to leave the country, the Duke inhabiting his former place, and Sir Ambrose taking possession of a movable house in one of the streets upon the banks of the Thames. Here the worthy baronet found himself perfectly happy in the society of his niece Clara, whom her parents permitted to keep his house, and that of his old friend the Duke. "I begin to repent that my daughter is a queen," said the Duke to Sir Ambrose one night after supper, when the whole party were sitting cosily around the fire in Sir Ambrose's library. "I have not half the enjoyments I used to have when I could have more of her society. Now when I see her, it is but for an instant, and she can scarcely stay to ask me how I do, before she flies off to some of her new plans of improvement." "The face of the country will be quite changed in a few years, if all the plans of the Queen prosper," said Father Morris in his usual smooth, hypocritical manner. "I hope not," cried Sir Ambrose. "I hope it's no treason, Duke, but I must confess I wish your daughter had never been queen, if she can't leave things as they are." "They're such wild goose schemes that she takes into her head," said the Duke piteously. "Only imagine, Sir Ambrose, she showed me this morning a plan for making aerial bridges to convey heavy weights from one steeple to another, a machine for stamping shoes and boots at one blow on a solid piece of leather, a steam engine for milking cows, an elastic summer house that might be folded up as to be put into a man's pocket. It's really quite provoking, and Edward is quite as scheming and visionary. I absolutely think, if we were both to die, they would not feel more than a temporary uneasiness at our loss. Their minds are so completely occupied with these gigantic projects." Whilst these two old men were sitting comfortably over the fire, commenting on the glorious days when they were young, and when all was right, or what was nearly the same thing, when all appeared to them to do so, quite forgetting that age has other eyes than youth, and that the change was in themselves, not the times, Clara was at splendid party given by Elvira, and Father Morris was soon left the Duke's library to join her. It was a ball, and the splendid court of Claudia seemed yet more brilliant under the reign of her successor. It was the first time Clara had ever been to court, and the effect of gorgeous magnificence on the scene had upon her was powerful in the extreme. She forgot her cares, her sadness, and her love. All seemed enchantment, and the old lady who acted as her chaperone was quite horrorized by the gauthery. Brilliant as all it was, however, the lovely goddess of the temple far exceeded even the splendor of the shrine, and the beholders gazed upon her with indescribable rapture. Beautiful as the fairy image of dream, kind, affable, and condescending to all, Elvira glided through the crowd, followed by her suite to the concert room. Here all that imagination of man could devise of harmony enchanted the ears, but harsh was every other sound to which stole upon the senses when Elvira was induced to forget her rank and mingle her voice with the music. Elvira's singing was perfection, clear as a trumpet with a silver sound. The round, full notes now swelled upon the ear in liquid melody, and then died away, soft and sweet, yet distinct even in the faintest strains. Prince Ferdinand was at her side, and his ardent gaze bespoke the intenseness of his admiration. Elvira had not before seen him since the night when their conversation with him had so powerfully excited the jealousy of Edmund, and as she now observed his manner and again attracted Edmund's attention, she blushed yet more deeply than before. Edmund saw her blushes, and, stung almost to madness by the sight, rushed violently out of the room. The night was cold and damp. A drizzling mist fell fast, and that particular chill that marks the first approaches of winter hung in the air. But Lord Edmund thought not of the weather, and he strode bareheaded through the palace gardens with hurried steps, the actions of a maniac, whilst the thick gloom that pervaded the sky contrasted fearfully with the brilliantly illuminated apartment he had just quitted. The gloominess of the scene, however, harmonized well with Edmund's feelings. He felt soothed insensibly, and though he still stalked moodily backwards and forwards, he became gradually more calm. Ungrateful woman, he thought, to treat me thus. Does she not owe everything to me? I could bear her coldness, I could resign her to a throne, but the idea of her loving another drives me to distraction. Curses on that fiend! It must be by his infernal arts that Ferdinand has triumphed. The cold, chaste Elvira could never give her love thus almost unsolicited, at the first sight, if it were not for the work of magic. By heaven, I would risk my soul for vengeance to this demon. As he spoke, his eyes fell upon the thicket near him, and he fancied he saw a figure of a man, half obscured, however, by the mist, emerge from its gloomy recesses. He gazed intently, and the figure glided slowly on with cat-like creeping steps. The mind of Edmund was worked up to a frenzy. He almost fancied a demon had appeared obedient to his wish to receive his pledge and work his bidding. "Speak!" cried he in a voice that sounded fearfully amidst the surrounding stillness. "Speak! Art thou a demon or a mortal?" All was silent. The figure glided on, and Lord Edmund, oppressed by supernatural terrors and shuddering at the sound of his own voice, could bear no more. He darted upon the figure, and grasping it roughly, he exclaimed, "Man or devil, I fear thee not, and thus I will grapple with thee." "Gently, my son," replied the well-known voice of Father Morris. "In what have I offended you?" "Pardon, Holy Father," returned Edmund. I knew not what I did. My passion blinded me." "And what has caused this passion? The mind of Edmund is too noble to be lightly moved." "Oh, talk not of my nobleness of my mind, Father. I feel I am but a poor weak worm. Nobleness belongs to God alone. 'Tis blasphemy to apply the term to man." "Tell me your grievance. They must, I am sure, be great, or they would not thus affect you. It is my holy office to console affliction. Speak then, my son, for remember that though joy is doubling by being partaken, grief is lessened by being shared, and woe robbed in half for its bitterness." "I have little to confess, Father. I was weak and foolish, but Elvira—" "And you are astonished at a woman's fickleness. Light as the eider down, and unstable as the changing wind. Inconsistency is natural to the sex. They crave incessantly for novelty, and the vanity is their only real passion. If that be gratified, they ask no more." "And has not Elvira's vanity been gratified even to satiety? Have I not idolized and worshipped her? Was it not my power that made her who she is? And is this my reward, to be scorned, deserted, laughed at, for what? A stranger, a boy, my prisoner?" "Whom do you mean?" asked the friar. "Prince Ferdinand," returned Edmund. "Impossible!" cried Father Morris, staring with a well-feigned astonishment. "Elvira cannot surely love Prince Ferdinand, and yet now I recollect I saw her talking to him even now with an appearance of deep interest when I passed through the splendid chambers." "Damnation!" exclaimed Lord Edmund vehemently, driven to distraction by his speech. For, strange to tell, though we may be certain of the reality of our own sufferings, they always seem to come with double poignancy when we hear them related by another. "Calm yourself, my son," said Father Morris in his silky tones, eyeing him with about as much compassion as an angler feels when writhing of a worm on his hook. "These bursts of passion are unworthy of you." "Oh, Father," cried Edmund, softening almost to tears, "you know not how I love that woman. Your grave, serious feelings, disciplined by the restraint of a cloister, mortified by your renunciation of all earthly pleasures, can form no idea of the depth of fierceness of mine. Your passions, father, are dead to you, subdued by holy patience and calmness. But mine rage with the fury of a volcano and destroy me. Oh, that my fond attachment, my long devoted services, my adoration should be thus rewarded. Yes, my adoration, for I have adored her, father. I worshipped her like a goddess, and though I doted on her charms, and would have endured unheard of torments to have been blessed with their possession, yet did I not sacrifice my hopes? Did I not relinquish the treasure when just within my grasp, because her happiness was dearer to me than my own? And now to see her lavish her favors on that boy! She smiled upon him, father. He indeed dared to take her hand and press it to his lips. I saw him kiss it, not with the calm respect of a kneeling subject, but with the fervor, the impassioned ardor of a lover. And then he looked at her, curses on my thought, and she did not reprove, but casting her eyes down softly, blushed consent. Damnation, I can't endure it. Passion, my son, enthralls its own punishment. You see everything with a jaundiced eye. Elvira's nature is gentle and yielding. She feared to hurt his feelings by her harshness. 'Tis but the natural consequence of that very softness you have so often admired. Why should you quarrel with it now? 'Tis the same that charmed you, same that now it is extended to another, and will be soon, no doubt, to all the world. Elvira has been educated in retirement, and seeing only yourself and Edric, you thought her conduct was the effect of partiality to you, when it was in fact but her natural nature. She is now upon the larger theatre, and you must expect to see myriads of kneeling victims worship her beauty, and pay homage at her feet. And you suppose she will be displeased at their attention? No, she is far too gentle. She has no firmness, and the same submission she pays to you she will, if you offend her, easily transfer to another. She is not formed to govern. She would obey and be happy, but the weight of government would overwhelm her if she was left alone to sustain it. Shake off, then, these selfish feelings and be again yourself. You have often said you only wished her happiness, and if that be the case, even if she should really love Prince Ferdinand, you ought to rejoice to see her in his arms. Sooner would I perish, sooner would I involve all the universal ruin, but it is impossible. She scarcely knows him. And if it were so, still you would be wrong to blame Elvira for that. In fact, she cannot help. Her yieldness softens as a defect of her character. Fool that I was, that very softness caught me, and my fond heart fell captive in its chains. But it was folly, infatuation. I see my error. Rosabella has more character. She can love. Lord Edmund crossed his arms upon his breast, and was soon lost in a reverie, which Father Morris was careful not to interrupt, but which was broken by the approach of Trevors, his lordship's aide-de-camp and secretary. "What do you want?" asked Lord Edmund sternly. "I came to seek your lordship. I feared you were unwell, as I missed your lordship from the party." "You missed me?" repeated Lord Edmund bitterly. "You missed me? And did no one else discover my absence? Was it so marked that my servant could observe it, and yet no one else?" "Did not the Queen inquire of Lord Edmund?" asked Father Morris. "I did not hear her Majesty," replied Trevors. "How was she engaged? What was she doing?" demanded Lord Edmund. "She was sitting, talking to Prince Ferdinand, my lord." Lord Edmund gnashed his teeth together, grinding them with fury, and rushed back to the house without speaking, whilst Trevor followed at a humble distance. "He has it," cried Father Morris triumphantly. "He has it. He is mine forever." Several days elapsed from this period before Elvira again saw Lord Edmund. She was surprised at his absence, as indeed he was so interwoven in her schemes and plans that nothing went on well without him.
Your Majesty will have the goodness to affix a royal seal to this ordinance, Lord Gustavus said one morning.
I don't know, replied Elvira. I can't tell what to do. I wish Lord Edmund were here.
He may soon be sent for, said Lord Gustavus pompously. Though, with all due deference to your Majesty's better judgment, it does not appear to me that his presence is exactly requisite.
Lord Edmund, however, was summoned, and he came. But oh, how changed since Elvira had seen him last. His face looked pale and thin, his cheeks were sunken, his eyes hollow and heavy, whilst his deep voice sounded hoarse and unnatural. Passion had passed through his soul and withered as it went. Elvira's heart smote her as she gazed upon him. "Have you been ill, Edmund?" she said, in tones of melting softness. "Why was I not informed? Surely you could not think I would willingly neglect you. Could you judge me so harshly?" The firm breast of Edmund softened as she spoke, and tears swam in his eyes as he struggled to reply with calmness. Yes, tears. The brave, warlike Edmund, whose strength of mind and firmness had resisted unequaled dangers, now trembled before a woman. "You must have some advice," continued Elvira. "Dr. Coleman, Dr. Hardman, can you not prescribe for your patients?"
"His lordship appears feverish," said Dr. Coleman. "No doubt he's rested ill."
"Yes, yes," returned Dr. Hardman with a malignant smile. "His lordship's eyes betray his want of rest." "I have been slightly indisposed," said Lord Edmund, rallying his spirits to speak. "But I am better. Is there anything in which my services can be useful to your Majesty?"
"Her Majesty wishes you to inspect this bill," replied Lord Gustavus solemnly, "before she gives it her royal assent."
Lord Edmund's eyes sparkled. "Then she still thinks my opinion of importance," he thought. "Lord Edmund's illness, I hope, is past," said Dr. Hardman maliciously, "for he certainly looks better even since he came into the room." Lord Edmund was better. The sudden revulsion of feeling had taken place within him, and the hope was again illuminated in his bosom. Passion again rushed through his soul. She shall be mine," thought he, whilst fire flashed from his eyes. "The hated law shall be repealed. Difficulties only increase the value of the prize, and they vanish before our determined spirit. What shall I, before whose arms shall nations have fallen vanquished, shrink like a coward from the first trouble that assails me? Oh, no, I will not be so weak. Opposition shall only animate my courage. Treasures would scarcely be worth acceptance if they lay beneath one's feet. A brave man spurns an easy victory. I will exert my powers, and Elvira shall be mine." Father Morris was in the levee, and he watched with anxious eyes the fluctuations of Edmund's expressive countenance.
"Perdition sees her beauty," muttered he. "With one look she undoes whole months of labor. But he shall yet be mine. Cheops has sworn he shall, and Rosabella shall be queen. Be the mummy mortal or fiend, he is resistless, and he has unbounded power over the human heart, and what he wills must be accomplished."
Some weeks elapsed, during which Lord Edmund, restored to his former influence in the government, labored assiduously to prepare the minds of the people for abolishing the law that prevented the marriage of the Queen. With the greatest care he endeavored to make Elvira popular. For this purpose he persuaded her to remit those burthens that weighed most heavily upon the people, replacing them with taxes levied in a more indirect way, for the mass of a population seldom grumbles at taxation, unless it sees the trifles for which it pays. Men do not regard the giving double of the real value of a commodity, a tenth part so much, as paying even a small direct sum for the use of any of the common necessities of life. By judiciously acting upon this principle, Edmund made himself adored, and whispers were even buzzed about, lamenting that he was not king. This was the point to which Edmund had wished to bring the people, and he pursued his plan by supporting the poor against the rich, and rigorously punishing the magistrates or officers of justice who were attempting to oppress the people. The multitude generally hate those entrusted with the execution of the laws, perhaps upon the same principle as the bleeding culprit abhors the sight of a whip that has flogged him. And their natural conceit and presumption were flattered by the attention paid to their countenance, till, by his judicious management, Lord Edmund found that he had obtained the entire devotion of the mob, and could wield them at his pleasure. Time rolled on, and winter had already wrapped its frozen mantle around the world, when one day Father Morris abruptly entered the apartment of Rosabella. "It is all over," cried he, as he threw himself in despair upon the couch. "Edmund has obtained the consent of the people for the Queen to marry, and no doubt in a few weeks he will be the husband of Elvira." "The husband of Elvira?" cried Rosabella, with her eyes flashing fire, and her cheeks glowing, whilst every fibre quivered with agitation, and her fine features bespoke the tremendous passions of a demon. "May everlasting misery attend the fiend that has deceived us, that has led us on step by step to our destruction, and is perhaps even now mocking our despair. Yes, yes," continued she, as the fiendish laugh of Cheops rang in her ears, and his detested form stood again before her. "I expected this. You come to enjoy your triumph and mock our credulity. But no, this arm is yet powerful enough to revenge my wrongs, and it shall annihilate my rival, and thou, wretch, detested, hideous wretch, thou shalt feel its vengeance." "This to your friend?" said Cheops with his bitter smile. "Fie, fie! How blind is human reason when the passions intervene! All is for the best. Have patience. Wait a little, and my promises will yet be accomplished." "If Elvira had died," murmured Father Morris, a dark frown gathering upon his brow. "You would not be alive now," said the mummy. "But fear not. All is as you can wish." "As we can wish?" cried Rosabelle indignantly. "Yes, as you can wish," returned Cheops firmly. "Edmund has obtained permission for Elvira to marry any natural-born subject of the realm, but she will not wed him, for she loves another, and that other is a foreigner. He will be enraged at her refusal, and jealousy will alienate him from her cause. He will then naturally espouse that her rival from ambition and revenge. Rosabella will be queen, and the law which prevented the marriage of the sovereign being abolished, Edmund will become her husband, if not from love, at least from ambition." "Oh, Cheops, it is useless to resist. We are thy slaves. Do with us as you wilt." "Say rather you are slaves of your own passions," murmured the mummy as they parted. It was a clear, frosty day in November when Elvira, scarcely knowing why, wandered into the garden belonging to the resplendent palace of Somerset House, and, entering the pavilion, reclined upon a couch placed opposite to a window that commanded a view of the river. The pavilion was decorated with the utmost taste. Its windows, opening to the ground, were shaded with curtains of gossamer net, lined with pink. The walls were beautifully painted, divided into panels by highly ornamented columns. Books, drawings, and other musical instruments were scattered around, whilst tripods supporting vases filled with the rarest exotic flowers shed sweet fragrance through the air, and the carpet was so soft and thick that it felt like moss beneath the feet. Even in this temple of luxury, however, its fair possessor was not happy. She sighed as she surveyed the gorgeous refinement around her, and felt forcibly the insufficiency of greatness. Listlessly she turned her eyes upon the figures painted upon the walls. They represented the loves of Mars and Venus. They were exquisitely painted. The artist had given to the life the tenderest modesty of a goddess, and the ardent passion of her lover. Elvira gazed upon his glowing countenance and sparkling eyes, and then, looking down, sighed yet more heavily than before. She dismissed her attendants, retaining only Emma, that long her eyes were fixed on vacancy, and her mind absorbed in mournful contemplations, when suddenly she was startled by the entrance of a page, and the appearance of Lord Edmund Montague, who followed almost at the moment of the page's repeating his name, his countenance beaming joy and hope dancing in his eyes. "Oh, Elvira," he cried, "you are now mine forever. The people permit you to marry. The lords in council have signed the law. People have proclaimed it with acclamations. You are free. You are no longer debarred from the inestimable pleasures of domestic life. You are dependent. You may marry any natural-born citizen of the realm, and you will be mine. And will you be mine?" "And so relinquish my independence the moment I obtain it," said Elvira, smiling. "Oh, my loved, my adored Elvira, consent to make me happy. Believe me, you shall be free, and still as much a queen as this moment." "Edmund," said Elvira seriously, "you deserve more than I can give you, for I will not insult you by supposing you would be satisfied with the possession of my crown without my heart, and that it is not my power to bestow." "My dearest Elvira, you but fancy this. I know your feelings are warm, your sensibility acute, and your generosity unbounded. You can then want a heart?" "Alas, no, but I have discovered I possess one, only in time to know that I have given it to another." "And is that other youth and a stranger?" asked her lover, gasping for breath. "He is," replied Elvira, blushing and looking down. "Then indeed I am wretched," cried Lord Edmund, and striking his clenched hand vehemently against his forehead, he darted out of the room. Elvira gazed after him with a feeling almost unmounting to terror. Terrified at the strength of his passion she had awakened, she appeared stupefied, and stood looking like a child who had accidentally cut the string which confined the wheels of some powerful machinery on hearing its fearful clatter above its head. "Oh, madam, madam!" cried Emma, writhing her hands. "What will become of us? Your Majesty has offended Lord Edmund forever, and that wretch who, I am certain, is a fiend incarnate." "Peace, Emma," said Elvira. "You forget my rank. I will not be dictated to." "Pardon me, dear madam. You know I love you, and I also, that you presume upon my love. Begone!" Emma obeyed, and Elvira was left alone. Dreadfully agitated, and quite unable to compose herself or arrange the chaos of her thoughts, she walked to the windows of the pavilion, and opening one of them, looked out upon the gardens. It is already said that these delightful grounds were thrown open to the public, but in consequence of the ease in which they might be enjoyed, a few half-pay officers, attorneys without clients, physicians without patients, clergymen looking out for livings, hissed prayers, disappointed authors, and discarded servants, alone strolled along their romantic walks, and paused occasionally to gaze upon the beautiful works of art with which they were decorated. The English were now decidedly the first sculptors in the world. Chemical preparations alone being used to supply light and heat, smoke was unknown, and the atmosphere being no longer thick and cloudy, marble bore exposure to it without material injury. Besides this, perhaps no nation in the world produced more beautiful models of male and female beauty than England, and now that the women had long thrown off those deformers of the human shape, Cheops stays, Their forms developed themselves into perfect symmetry. Elvira, however, thought not of the gardens, nor of the works of art they confined. Yet, as she stood in the window, though absorbed in her own reflections, her eyes rested upon an exquisite statues before her. The inanimate marble seemed endowed with soul and spirit, whilst the graceful forms it represented seemed only to pause for a moment, and to be ready to start again in life and action after a short repose. In short, they appeared to breathe, and the spectator felt almost surprised when his eye had turned from them, and to find them still in the same attitude as when they had looked again. The river was frozen, and persons glided along it in glittering trainneau, or skated gracefully with an infinite variety of movements, whilst every now and then a steam percussion movable bridge shot across the stream, loaded with goods and passengers, collapsing again the instant its burden was safely across on the other side. Pleased with the busy scene around her, Elvira stood and gazed, till half her trouble seemed to vanish, and a pleasing train of thought crept over her mind. "What have I done?" she thought, "and yet I do not repent. No, no, I could not act otherwise. The noble and devoted love of Edmund deserves my warmest gratitude, and I have done right in my own to truth to him, painful as it has been to me to do so, rather than torture his generous bosom by exciting hopes I never meant to realize. Yes, I have done right," she repeated aloud, "and I am perfectly satisfied with my conduct." "Then you have no reason to be contented," said the deep voice of Cheops immediately behind her. "For few indeed are the mortals that can say so with justice." The solemn tones of the mummy sank like foreboding of evil upon the heart of Elvira, and she shuddered involuntarily. "You think I have done wrong, then?" she said. "I did not say that," he returned calmly. "But had I not known the sex, I might perceive he felt surprised that you should avow, unasked for, a secret to love Edmund, which you have sedulously endeavored to keep concealed even from me." "Alas," cried Elvira, "my motives—" "Were those of a woman," interrupted Cheops, "a being fated to work mischief. I do not blame you, for you have only acted according to your natural instinct." "What do you mean?" asked Elvira, turning pale and trembling, for the words of the mummy created an undefinable dread upon her mind. Sorry. "Listen," said Cheops, "and I will tell you. If you had confided your secret to me, it would have produced good, for I should have aided your passions and not given assistance unless it was required. But by telling it to Lord Edmund, you have produced evil, for he mistakes your love for another, and consequences may be fatal. Thus it is clear that you could not have done otherwise than you have, for when there matter, a woman has known to hesitate between good and evil, and not choose the latter." "Mistakes my lover for another?" exclaimed Elvira. "For God's sake, explain yourself." "He thinks you meant Prince Ferdinand," said the mummy coldly, "and he is now seeking him in order to destroy him." "Oh God! Oh God!" cried Elvira in the bitterest agony. "What will become of me? Where is Edmund? Let me fly to implore him to spare the prince." "It does not appear to me," said Cheops still more calmly, "that your endeavors to preserve him are at all likely to produce the effect you wish, for as Lord Edmund already believes you love the prince, and as that belief is the reason for his hatred, you showing a violent anxiety for his welfare does not appear to me exactly the mode most calculated to destroy his suspicions." "True, true," cried Elvira, wringing her hands. "Alas, alas, what will become of me?" Whilst, as she spoke, a piercing cry rang in her ears, and a sudden rush of all the persons in the gardens took place towards one particular spot. Scarcely knowing what she did, Elvira followed the crowd, and shrieking with the indescribable terror as she heard the clashing of swords, pale and trembling, she hurried forward, and arrived just as Prince Ferdinand, uttering a deep groan, fell beneath the sword of Lord Edmund. Elvira screamed, and throwing herself upon the body, endeavored in vain to revive it, quite forgetting in the excessive agitation the crowd that surrounded her, and the interpretation that might be put upon her endeavor. One sole idea occupied her mind, and chilled it with horror. It was that her impudence had most probably deprived a fellow creature of existence. Lord Edmund, in the meantime, stood in statue-like insensibility, gazing upon her with feelings of unutterable anguish. Her grief, her violent emotion, seemed to confirm the passion she had avowed, and if she loved, his excursions had only paved way for the success of the rival. The thought was madness. Lord Edmund gnashed his teeth, countenance changed, blood gushed in torrents from his side, for he too was wounded, and he leant fainting against a tree. The confusion that now prevailed was indescribable. It was high treason to draw a sword in the precincts of the royal palace, and the guards, who were instantly assembled, took the offenders into custody. They were both incapable of offering any resistance, and they were hurried away to prison amidst the exclamations of the mob. Elvira had fainted, and she was carried back to the palace, whilst the whispered speculations of the crowd upon the strangeness of the scene arose in half-stifled murmurs like the distant roar of an ocean. The attention of the spectators, however, was soon fixed upon the poor old Duke of Cornwall. He had stood bending forwards, his hands clasped and his eyes riveted upon his daughter during the whole of her ineffectual attempts to revive the prince. The old man seemed turned to stone. He neither moved nor spoke. His glassy eyes were set, and his livid lips slightly quivered, as he uttered a faint groan, and fell senseless into the arms of his attendants in a fit of apoplexy. The spectators thought him dead, and fancied his heart had broken on discovering this unexpected weakness on the part of his adored daughter. Everyone was powerfully affected, and everyone seemed bursting to speak, though no one knew exactly what he might venture to say. Lord Gustavus looked stern, Lord Maysworth looked important, and Dr. Hardman sly, whilst the Lords Noodle and Doodle shook their little heads, till they seemed in imminent danger of becoming separated from their bodies. Rosabella's heart alone swelled with rapture, and her eyes beamed with ill-conceived triumph. "The mummy was right," thought she. "Elvira must fall, and Edmund will be mine." Yay! I finished the chapter before ad break, which is in only a few minutes. So I will see everyone in a bit. Welcome back. Okay, I'll still advertise my merchandise, so not a single piece is sold except to me. Which I immediately gave away as gifts. But anyway, Edmund is injured. Ferdinand is possibly dead. Now Elvira is blood covered. And Rosabella is happy. So, let's continue. Chapter 27. The evening of the day on which Prince Ferdinand and Lord Edmund were committed to prison, Sir Ambrose, as he was writing in his study, was startled by a loud scream, and flying to the spot from whence it proceeded, he found Clara lying upon the ground insensible, whilst Abelard was stooping over him, and endeavouring to render her some assistance.
"Good God!" cried Sir Ambrose. "What's the matter?"
"It is all owing to the carelessness of the domestic assistants next door," cried Abelard. "Number 7 has just come back from Brighton, and one of the assistants being occupied in making observations on the sky, instead of minding what he was doing, pushed the house a little on one side as it was slipping into the sockets, and poking their horizontal spout through our library window, they have knocked down the shelf of books, and frightened poor Miss Clare out of her wits." "Hi, Nerdy."
"Stupid idiots," said the baronet. "They might have killed her if the books had fallen upon her."
"I beg your pardon, Sir Ambrose," said the culprit, putting his head in through the window. "I did not conceive Miss Montague would have been injured if the books had fallen upon her. The weight of her body, I should apprehend, must be nearly equivalent to that of the books. Consequently, the resistance she was capable of opposing, being fully equal to the blow she would have received, the effect must have been neutralized."
"Confound your explanations," said Sir Ambrose, whose anger was increased tenfold by the speech. "You've killed my niece, and now you want to drive me distracted. Clara, my dear Clara, open your eyes, my love. Are you hurt?"
"In prison, child. You must be dreaming."
Hold on.
"Oh, my dear uncle," sighed Clara. "Edmund is in prison, and he certainly will be beheaded."
"In prison, child? You must be dreaming."
"Indeed, I'm not, uncle. I heard men who were placing the adjoining house say so. His father, Prince Ferdinand, in the palace garden."
"My boy, my darling boy!" cried Sir Ambrose, and he rushed out of the room in despair.
"Follow him, for heaven's sake, follow him, Abelard," said Clara. The worthy butler obeyed, wringing his hands, lifting his eyes up to heaven, whilst Clara remained perfectly motionless and apparently absorbed in thought. "Oh, save him," she said after a short pause, "or perish in the attempt."
Eba!
In the bitterest anguish of mind, Sir Ambrose hastened to the palace, but he was refused admittance, as he was informed the Queen was in high fever. He inquired for his friend the Duke. He, too, was invisible, his late attack having placed his life in imminent danger. Dr. Coleman was in attendance on the Queen, and the Lords of the Council, though they affected to sympathize with the unfortunate father, evidently, though covertly, rejoiced in the disgrace of their most powerful rival. Repulsed on every side, Sir Ambrose now proceeded to the prison. "You didn't know I stream?" "I am, coming up on after my 4th anniversary already." "That's fine. Welcome in." Which Thursdays and Fridays I read, and now Mondays and Tuesdays I play games. So I'm trying to do more. Repulsed on every side, Sir Ambrose now proceeded to the prison, but here he also was refused entrance. And sadly and slowly he returned home in despair, resting his sole remaining hopes upon the advice and assistance of Father Morris, upon whose gigantic strength of mind he was accustomed implicitly to rely in all impotency of age and misery. The prison to which Ferdinand and Lord Edmund had been conveyed was situated in a close, disagreeable part of the city of London, called Kensington. It had formerly been a palace, and had been surrounded by a noble park, miscalled a garden. The devastating hand of improvement had, however, as usual, waged war against all the sublimer charms of nature, and the majestic beauty of Kensington fell victims to its fury. Narrow, unwholesome streets now rose where spreading oaks had once stretched forth their venerable arms, and verdant lawns had become dirty causeways, whilst ponds were turned to water pipes, and Cheops well kept a common sewer. As Ferdinand and Edmund, however, had never seen Kensington on its pristine glories, they could not now regret the change, and it was to them neither more or less than a place of confinement, a spot very few people show any manifest relish for. It's okay, Bob. Immediately upon their arrival, Prince Ferdinand and Lord Edmund had their wounds dressed by the automaton steam surgeon belonging to the prison, which, being properly arranged and wound up, staunched the blood, spread the plasters, and affixed the bandages with as much skill as though it had been done nothing but a walk of a hospital in its life. As soon as these operations were performed, the prisoners were locked up, in separate cells, and left to meditate upon their situations. "Good heavens!" cried Ferdinand, looking around in astonishment at the elegant apartment which he was shown into, adorned with a painted velvet carpet, silk curtains, and chairs and tables inlaid with brass and ivory, whilst a sumptuous canopy hung over the bed of down on one side, and little divers cupids supported lights, held back the curtains, and performed numerous other useful offices in different corners. "Can this be a prison? Neither Paris nor Vienna possess palaces half so splendid." The surprise of Ferdinand was natural, as he was still a stranger among England, and did not know that our happy island had been long blessed with a race of people who thought prisons should be made agreeable residences, and had gone on improving them till they had ended making them temples of luxury. In spite of all the conveniences of his prison, however, Ferdinand was perfectly wretched. He could not imagine what reason Lord Edmund had had for fastening a quarrel upon him, for as his passions for Elvira, though violent, had been quite as evanescent as though he had been formerly entertained by Rosabella, he had not the least idea of exciting Lord Edmund's jealousy. Fatigued at length with forming fruitless conjectures, he threw himself upon his bed of down, and soon lost the remembrance of his cares in a refreshing slumber. In the meantime, Clara was revolving in her mind the best method of putting in practice a wild scheme that she had formed, of visiting Prince Ferdinand in prison. She did not dare confide her plan to anyone, for she feared that anyone she might consult would either laugh at her folly or betray her secret. Besides, to obtain any assistance she must give some motive for her conduct, and as Clara did not exactly know her own reasons for this acting, it was quite impossible she could make out a case to satisfy another. To go, however, she was determined, and when the family of her uncle were all retired, she wrapped herself in a large mantle, and with some difficulty contrived to reach the street. The night was cold and dark, and a thick mist fell, and Clara seemed chilled to the heart, yet a feeling she could not account for urged her on. Clara was young and romantic, and she loved Prince Ferdinand, and she fancied him in danger. How was she to save him, she knew not, and yet it was solely the hope of saving him that urged her forward. She had discovered he was confined at Kensington, and thither she bent her steps. But as she passed the palace, she found a crowd of balloons floating around it, laden with persons whose anxiety respecting the Queen had kept them waiting, had indulged them to besiege her door personally with their inquiries, and whilst the lighted flambeaux belonging to the aerial vehicles flashed brightly in the air and looked like a multitude of dancing stars as they rapidly crossed and recrossed above each other overhead. This little incident completed poor Clara's bewilderment, and terrified lest she should be seen and recognized, she hurried on without exactly knowing where she was going, though perplexed by the different appearance of the streets seemed to assume in the darkness, and her own fears, she found her unspeakable dismay that she had lost her road. In the greatest agitation and distress, she now wandered to and fro, whilst her embarrassment was increased every moment by the ill-timed raillery of passers-by. At last she became quite surrounded by a group of people, who assailed her with so many questions and jokes that the poor girl, quite overpowered, stopped short and burst into tears. "Oh, and what are you to be about disturbing a poor young creature like that?" cried the well-known voice of Father Murphy, as the friar's portly figure was seen bustling through the mob. "What are you after there? Don't you see the poor thing has lost her way in the darkness, and if you bother her so, how do you think she'll ever be able to find it?" Never did any music sound so harmoniously in Clara's ears as the father's deep, rich brogue, and darting forward, she threw herself at his feet, and clasping her arms round his knees, she exclaimed, "Oh, save me! Clara Montague!" "Clara!" cried Father Murphy with utmost astonishment. "Clara, why in the name of heaven brings you out, child, at this hour of the night?" "Oh, don't ask me, Father," returned Clara, gasping for breath. "That is, I will tell you presently. Take me away, for the love of the Blessed Virgin, save me from these men." "Come here, my child," said the father, drawing her arm within his own, and walking away with her. "Let us leave these people. And now," continued he, when they were already some distance from the crowd, "you must tell me, child, what brings you here?" The question, though it was a very natural one for the friar to ask, was beyond Clara's power to answer. In fact, she trembled so dreadfully that she could scarcely stand, and when she attempted to speak, her teeth chattered in her head so violently that she could not articulate a syllable. "Hard thing," muttered the passionate priest, after waiting a few minutes in vain for the answer. "She'll be better presently." All now was dark, and they walked slowly some paces without speaking, when 4 bright lights flashed from the neighboring clock announced the contemplation of the hour. On the next instant, the solemn, deep-toned bell distinctly pronounced the word 1, and then all was silent again. "I had no fancy it was so late," said the father, whose disposition was naturally too cheerful to let him ever remain long silent. "Do you think it was 1 o'clock, Clara? I little thought I should never be wandering with you, my dear, in the streets at such a time of night. I can't help fancying it's all a dream. Anyhow, speak, darling, if you can, and tell me all about it." Clara felt still more faint, and only replied by clinging yet more firmly to the friar's arm. Father Murphy was frightened, and thought she was going to die. "Oh, mother," he cried, "what will I do? She's breathing her last, sweet creature, and nobody by to help her, and I'm not knowing how to comfort her." The delicate form of Clara seemed every instant to become more heavy, as she clung still unconsciously to the friar's arm, and grasped feebly for breath. "Oh, what will I do? What will I do?" repeated the poor father, looking eagerly around for aid. All, however, was dark and gloomy, and silent as the grave. Suddenly, however, a bright meteor-like substance appeared on the edge of the horizon, and the friar, to his unspeakable transport, discovered it to be Patton's night fire-stage balloon. He hailed it, and in a few minutes it was hovering over their heads. The accommodation ladder was let down, and Clara and her companion, having ascended to the car, the balloon again rapidly sailed on. "Where are we going?" asked Clara faintly. "Oh," returned the friar, "that's what I never thought of asking, darling. But heaven be praised that ye are so much better as to be able to bother yourself about it." "We're going to Kensington, miss," said the balloon conductor. "Kensington?" repeated Clara, clapping her hands together in transport. "Thank God!" "It's a very good thing to be thankful, anyhow," said the father. "But I own I don't see why you should cry out such a rapture when you find we are going wrong road." No, father," returned Clara. "Not the wrong road, for Kensington is the goal of all my wishes." "Poor thing, she's certainly distracted," thought Father Murphy. "The loss of her cousin has deprived her of her senses, but I will let her take her own way. Perhaps she'll be better presently." "Where would you like to be set down?" asked the man. "Near the prison," cried Clara. "Near the prison?" repeated Father Murphy, shrugging his shoulders. Aye, I was right." Not another word was spoken till the balloon stopped and the passengers were set down. All still was dark, save the lamplight that gleamed from the battlements of the prison, and showed a tall, clumsy-looking figure that marched with heavy, measured steps to and fro before the gates, whilst at a little distance lay a party of soldiers, revalking. Clara shuddered as she looked at them, and hastily turning away, timidly approached the figure and begged it to let her into the prison. It continued to march, but as it did not speak, she attempted to pass by. "No admittance," said the figure as she touched it, and trying to reach the door. "I implore you," cried Clara, wringing her hands in agony. The figure did not reply, but continued its solemn tramp unmoved, its hollow steps falling heavily upon the ear at regular intervals. Driven to despair, Clara again endeavored to push past it, but she was again repulsed by the figure, reiterated its monotonous "No admittance." Clara threw herself upon her knees before it in agony. "Clara, Clara, dear!" cried Father Murphy, attempting to raise her. "You're certainly quite beside yourself. Don't you see it is an automaton? Nothing can stop it but the proper check-string. And that is a little guardhouse, round which you can see the soldiers lying." "They will admit me," cried Clara wildly. "They are men and will surely listen to me." Then, before the father could stop her, she flew towards him, and throwing herself at the feet of the commanding officer, implored his pity. The officer was a man of feeling, and, touched with her compassion at her evident anguish, he had promised to grant her permission ere Father Murphy, who was too fat to move with much agility, could reach them. Thank you," cried Clara, kissing the officer's hand. "God bless you." The officer smiled at her warmth. "Wait here a little," he said. "I will soon return and admit you, if I obtain permission. But state prisoners are ordered to be guarded so closely, I dare not take any step respecting them without consulting the governor." "So, then you will get in after all," said Father Murphy, who had approached near enough to hear the last speech. Well, what a world this is we live in. Here have been dukes and princes begging for admission unsuccessfully, and yet a little saucy girl, only because she happens to be half distracted, is let in at the very first word." Clara did not reply, but wrapping herself in her cloak, sat down on a large stone near the gates to wait the officer's return. The solemn automaton had stopped for a moment to allow him to pass, but it now resumed its slow measured step, and Clara's heart sickened at the sound. The mist cleared away, and the night became fine, though cold, while the moon, having struggled through the clouds that rapidly scudded across the sky, shed her pale, feeble light upon the scene. Clara shuddered as she looked at the heavy, dark building behind her, and wrapping her cloak tighter around her, fixed her eyes anxiously upon the sky, watching the varied shapes assumed by the clouds as they drifted along, and sighing heavily as they passed. "Now tell me, dear," said Father Murphy, seating himself beside her, "what you mean to say your cousin when you get in to see him? Speak freely, for the devil a word of Shapland's wonder shall hear, and you're going to say it by reason of their being fast asleep." "My cousin? Who? What?" "Your cousin Edmund, that you've come so far to see," resumed their father. "My cousin? Yes," replied Clara. "Oh, aye, true. It was my cousin I fought with him, you know. But I don't want to see my cousin." "Not want to see your cousin?" relayed Father Murphy, his eyes almost starting from his head in the excess of astonishment. "Why did you come here, then?" To see Prince Ferdinand," said Clara in a faltering voice, looking down and blushing. Father Murphy's astonishment was far too great for words, and he could only look at her in speechless horror as he revolved some plan in his mind for getting her quietly back to her friends. "How wild she looks," thought he. "She must be in a confinement. There's no saying what one thinks a strange delusion may carry her." Whilst the poor father was cogitating and repeating to himself divers coaxing forms for words, and by the help of which he had hoped to persuade her to return, the automaton again stopped, and the prison door flying open, the officer beckoned to Clara to advance. She floored towards him. "Clara, Clara, dear," said Father Murphy, "had you not better go home?" But Clara heard him not. She was already in the prison, and the doors had closed. The automaton sentinel had again resumed his measured, beaten track. Oh dear," cried unhappy Father Murphy. "What will I do? How will I get her out? Poor Sir Ambrose, he will break his heart. I dare say he knows nothing of it. These kind of fits always come sudden." Thus lamenting, the worthy father walked up and down before the prison in a state of pitiable distress, till a bright thought flashed across his mind, and he set off as fast as his trembling limbs could carry him to put it into execution. In the meantime, Clara had followed the officer into the prison, and her heart beat faster as she advanced, for her undertaking now appeared to be in a new light, and she trembled as she thought of the interpretation the prince might put upon her boldness. It was, however, too late to repent. She had not even time for hesitation. The officer is already at the door, the bolts are withdrawn, and Clara finds herself in the presence of Ferdinand. Confused and horror-struck at what she had done, she, however, scarcely knew where she was. Everything seemed to swim before her eyes. Gasping for breath, she caught firm hold of the doorway for support. For a few moments Ferdinand was not aware of her presence, as he sat gloomily resting his head upon his hand, his elbow supported by the table, which, upon he lay buried papers, was Hans, his favorite servant, who had followed him from Germany, stood beside him. Awed by his abstraction, and abashed by his presumption she had been guilty of intruding unsolicited upon his presence, Clara still stood irresolute, fearing alike to advance or to recede, till the officer, impatiently at her delay, cried in a loud voice, "Walk in, if you please, ma'am, that I may relock the door. I shall return to let you out in an hour." The sound of the officer's voice caught the attention of Ferdinand, and he looked towards the doorway, from the shade of which he saw the trembling Clara was now forced to advance. "Miss Montague?" cried Prince Ferdinand, who had seen her at one of Elvira's parties, and had thought her so pretty as to inquire her name. "This is an unhoped-for pleasure. I did not expect this." I came, stammered Clara, and here she stopped short, for upon the recollection she really could not tell why she came. "I am delighted to see you," said the prince, smiling and taking her hand, "whatever may be the cause that has procured me this honor." I'd better sit down," stammered Clara, without having the least idea what she was talking about. "Well, then, we will sit down," said Ferdinand, and gently placing her upon a chair, he drew one to her side, and again took her hand. His touch thrilled through Clara's whole frame. She felt his ardent gaze upon her face, and dreadfully agitated, fearing she knew not what, she turned away from him and tried to withdraw her hand. I believe I must go, she said. So soon, cried Ferdinand, again smiling, for it was impossible to mistake the cause of her confusion. I thought the jailer said he would not come back for you in less than an hour. He did, repeated Clara, quite unconscious of what she said, and without daring to look at him. My dear Miss Montague, will you not bestow one look upon me? Cried Ferdinand, in his most insinuating tone, sinking upon one knee before her and gently encircling her slender waist with his arm, as he turned her towards him. Clara could not resist his imploring eyes. Her heart beat, she blushed, she trembled. She looked upon the ground, when suddenly Ferdinand uttered a faint cry, and starting upon his feet. Clara gazed at him in wonder, for that countenance, so lately beaming with love and tenderness, now seemed to gasp with horror. She followed the direction of his eyes, and beheld in the doorway the giant form of Cheops, whilst the mummy's appalling laugh resounded in his ears. Involuntarily, Clara shuddered, and hid her face in her hands.
By the silver bow of Isis, cried Cheops tauntingly, I admire your charity, Miss Montague. Why do you hide your face? But so it is true, Merritt is always bashful, and the beneficial spirit that prompted Clara Montague to visit the distressed, and even prefer a stranger to her own cousin, makes her blush to avow her goodness.
Mercy, mercy, cried Clara, falling at his feet. You know my heart, and I implore your assistance.
And you shall have it, returned Cheops. As for you, continued he, addressing the prince, what is your wish?
Deliver me from this prison, and make Clara mine, and I will be your slave.
It is well, said the mummy. Clara, you must retire with me. This is no place for you. As for you, Prince, Lord Maysworth and Father Murphy will be admitted at your presence in the course of a few hours to consult you with respecting your defense. Follow their advice and fear nothing. Rely upon me and you shall be safe. Come, Clara, you must return to the house of your uncle. He is prepared to receive you and will forgive your absence, as Father Murphy will, ere we reach him, have fully explained its cause. And Sir Ambrose will overlook your folly in consideration of your youth. Adieu, Prince. We shall meet again.
The mummy and Clara now withdrew, leaving the prince's mind much relieved, as his confidence in his new friend was unbounded, whilst the discovery he had made of the devoted love of Clara soothed his troubled spirit, and robbed his confinement of half its bitterness.
Again the mummy's voice gets to me.
See if I can get one more chapter done. Chapter 28. In the meantime, Lord Edmund's mind had been tortured by the bitterest anguish, and his agitation, added to the pain of his wounds, had produced a considerable degree of fever. The conduct of Elvira and the anxiety she had evinced respecting the prince seemed to confirm his worst suspicions. Oh, God! Cried he, as he paced his prison in agony. I could have borne anything but this. It is too much, too much!
By heaven, I could sell myself to everlasting perdition to be revenged.
As he spoke, he heard the key of his dungeon door grate in the lock, and he shuddered, for he almost fancied some hideous spectre would appear in answer to his call, and he felt indescribably relieved when he heard the gentle, insinuating tones of Father Morris. Sweet is the voice of friendship to the disappointed spirit, and the soft falls of balm and consolidation for those we love upon the wounded heart. Edmund's bosom thus throbbed with transport when he saw the Reverend Father, and throwing his arms round his neck, he sobbed like a child.
"My dear Edmund," said the priest, who excessively affected, for he really loved Edmund, "it breaks my heart to see you thus. Cruel Elvira!"
"Oh, blame her not, father," exclaimed Edmund. "I cannot bear that you should even blame her. She is deceived. She is under the influence of infatuation. She cannot control our hearts, you know, father."
"But that she should be capable of loving another, when your services, your devoted affection—"
"Alas, alas, father! Love is not to be bought by services. All she could give me she has given. I possess her friendship and esteem."
"And are you satisfied with those?"
"Satisfied? Oh, heavens!"
"At any rate, I suppose you should bear that she married the Prince Ferdinand, if you thought it would contribute to her happiness."
"Married to him!" cried Edmund, gnashing his teeth in agony. "Married to him? Oh, anything but that! I will never live to see it."
"You are not likely," calmly returned the priest, "for as the state requires a victim, and Elvira will certainly not resign her Edmund, and your doubtfulness will receive and Elvira will certainly not resign her Edmund. You will doubtless be sacrificed to save him."
"Hold, hold!" cried Edmund, driven to madness by the thought. "Do not dare to speak those cursed words. I could die to serve her, but I will not be sacrificed. What, am I to be made a tool, a child, an idiot? Destined to labor for my rival, and denied even the poor satisfaction of showing the extent of my devotion? But I will not die so calmly. Elvira shall not forget me. I will see her. She shall at least know my sentiments. And if she treats me with scorn, I will die, it is true, but it shall be by my own hand, and at her feet. I will not be sacrificed. I will not steal out the life of a common criminal. No, the world shall know my wrongs. I will be heard. I will not fall unnoticed and unknown. Take this chain, Father Morris, and give it to her, and I tell her I implore, by the recollection of the moments that she bestowed it upon me, that she will grant me an interview. If she refuse me, but no, she cannot." Father Morris took the chain, and, promising to see the Queen, withdrew, leaving Lord Edmund in a state of indescribable agitation. He was not left long, however, to his solitary reflections, for as he paced with hasty strides in prison, and turned as he reached the wall, the mummy, Cheops, stood before him. "Oh, wretch!" cried Edmund. "What brings you here? Came you to torment your victims?"
"I came to help and comfort the unfortunate," said the mummy.
"Begone!" cried Lord Edmund. "I do not want your pity, or your proffered help I scorn."
"Spare your scorn, proud lord," returned Cheops. "It will not aid you, though I might."
"I want no aid," exclaimed Lord Edmund, "and least of all such help as you can give me. I despise alike your pity and your vengeance. Come what will, I rely upon myself, conscious of my own integrity. I do not fear to fall, though demons should assail me. Avaunt then, fiend, for ever thou shalt have no power." Cheops burst into one of his fiendish laughs, and exclaiming,
"That time will show," and disappeared.
Edmund felt relieved by his absence, though, in spite of his boasted firmness and the sovereign contempt he expressed to the mummy, he could not prevent his mind from dwelling upon the circumstance. The appearance of Cheops, indeed, never failed to excite a deep and powerful interest in the mind of all who conversed with him, whilst his appalling laugh struck terror in the firmest breast, and those who affected to despise his menaces could not prevent their minds from dwelling upon his words. The irresistible power had its full effect upon the mind of Edmund, and though he endeavored in vain to shake it off, and rouse his mind to think of other things, still the gigantic mummy seemed to stalk before him. In vain did he strive to picture himself his interview with the queen. The hideous features of the mummy rose in his imagination instead of the lovely form of Elvira, till at length, fatigued and exhausted, he threw himself upon his couch, yet even in his dreams the same image haunted him, and the same words rang in his ears. Whilst these scenes were taking place in the prison, Elvira was suffering all the torments of a burning fever. She was, indeed, seriously ill. The excessive agitation of her mind, and the horror she felt at the idea of being the murderer of Ferdinand, had overpowered her reason, and by the time Dr. Coleman arrived, he having been sent for at the first alarm, she was quite delirious. Though the thought that she alone had caused the danger for Ferdinand occupying her mind, and not being able to bear the idea that her folly might occasion the destruction of a human being, she raved of him incessantly, and repeatedly offered to sacrifice her life to preserve his. Her ravings were heard by her domestics, and being neither exactly understood nor correctly repeated, the reports, aided by the artful insinuations of Father Morris, soon produced rumors throughout the city that the queen was violently in love with Prince Ferdinand, and had gone mad because the law did not permit her to marry him. The effect this idea produced was prodigious, and was implicitly believed, for the lower classes are naturally fond of the marvelous, and when there are two sides to a question, very seldom disposed to err by judging too favorably, whilst the indignation excited was unbounded. In some cases, men are more tenacious of their prejudices than their rights. Thus, then, through the English, by consenting to the marriage of their queen, had deprived themselves the important right of electing their own sovereign. They considered that they had done was trifling, when compared with the horror they felt at the thought of submitting to a foreign king, whilst the emissaries of Rosabella, taking advantage of this feeling, by alternately playing upon their fears and magnifying their terrors, worked them up almost to the state of desperation. The party of Elvira, in the meantime, was quite unable to stem the torrent opposed to it. The queen and her father were both too ill to leave their beds, and Lord Edmund was in prison. "What will become of us?" whispered Emma to Dr. Coleman one day in the chamber of Elvira, when she fancied the queen to be asleep. "Tomorrow, Prince Edmund and Lord Edmund... Tomorrow, Prince Ferdinand and Lord Edmund are to be tried, and they say not even the Queen has the power to pardon them if they are convicted." "But it is too true," returned Dr. Coleman. "They must die. The punishment is horrid. The criminal is doomed to be burned by a slow fire." "Horrible!" cried Emma. "And this only for drawing a sword in the vicinity of the royal palace." "Alas, that is all. Ferdinand is accused of wishing to marry the queen, and the law is that to vote that her horrid death the man who shall presume to address her in the language of love, yet hold good against foreigners." "I cannot believe Prince Ferdinand even dared to think of the queen," said Emma. "Only God can judge the heart," observed Dr. Coleman. "But I am sorry to say the proofs are very strong against him. I have heard from undoubted authority that persons will swear they heard him absolutely make love to the queen, and that she promised to marry him if she could obtain the consent of her people." "It is false!" cried Elvira, starting from her bed and standing suddenly between them. "False as hell! Prince Ferdinand never addressed a single syllable breathing of love to me in his existence. He is a victim of a mistake, rather of my folly. He shall not die. I will save him or perish in the attempt. The calm, decided tone in which Elvira spoke, and her spectral appearance, produced an almost magical effect upon her auditors, and they stood awestruck and aghast while Elvira continued. Trust me, Emma, I will see my people. I will appeal to them myself. It is the day of receiving petitions in Blackheath Square, and there will be a multitude assembled. I will go there in person and address them. It's the raving of delirium, whispered Emma to Dr. Coleman. What shall I do? Do you dare to hesitate? Said Elvira, whose sense of hearing, sharpened by her recent illness, enabled her to catch distinctly the words of her favorite. Humour her, returned Dr. Coleman. In her present state, opposition would be fatal. It would indeed be fatal, said Elvira, seating herself in a large armchair, whilst the temporary colour of previous exertion had given her faded from her cheeks, and she looked the image of death. She will faint, cried Emma, flying for aid. It is impossible for her to go in this state, said the doctor. Impossible! Cried Elvira, starting up wildly, with her cheeks again glowing with the deepest crimson, whilst her eyes sparkled with superhuman fire. What is impossible to be determined in spirit? Haste, haste, Emma, and let me go, whilst I have yet strength, for I will, through death, await me there. My rashness has endangered the life of Prince Ferdinand, and I will die to save him. Farther opposition was useless, and the doctor retiring, Emma hastily attired her mistress. The people were expected to assemble as usual in the square, though, from the illness of the Queen, a deputation of nobles had been appointed to receive the petitions. The feelings of Elvira were wrought up to an unnatural energy. Every limb trembled with agitation, and every nerve thrilled with impatience. While she was dressing, and when she was ready, she descended the staircase, leaning upon the arm of Emma, her cheeks flushed with a hectic glow, her lips quivering, and her eyes shining with unusual brightness. At the foot of the staircase they met Cheops. He steadfastly regarded the Queen, and smiled at her agitated appearance with his usual calm scorn. Oh, cried Elvira, the moment she beheld him, my pride is humbled. I own I love Seymour. Aid me to save Ferdinand, and I am their slave. Appeal to your people, said Cheops, his eyes flashing with proud triumph. Your feelings will give you eloquence, but do not confine yourself to obtaining the power to pardon Ferdinand. Demand to be free. The people will refuse you nothing. Tell them first that they have insulted you by giving you permission to marry, and then by dictating whom you shall choose. Require perfect freedom. They will comply and bow their necks beneath your footstool. But rest not satisfied with any sort of actual submission. Endure no conditions. This is the moment you decide your future destiny. Act with energy, and you shall be happy. But if you falter, destruction is your portion. I will obey you to the letter, said Elvira, as she walked with a firm step past him and sprang into her ballroom, followed by Emma. Oh, my dear, dear mistress, said that faithful confidant, do not listen to the wretch. He is a serpent sent to wile you to destruction. Do not be advised to turn and relinquish his mad expertise. Elvira did not reply. Her feelings were too highly wrought to permit her to speak, and bending eagerly forward she watched, with an impatient eye, the streets and houses it flitted over, scarcely able to bear the agony of suspense during the time necessary lost in transit, and seeming every instant to long to participate herself toward the goals of her wishes. The balloon now rose unusually high, whilst masses of fleecy clouds hid the town from their view, and looked like flocks of sheep beneath their feet. Where are we going? Cried Elvira in agony. We shall be too late. No, no, said Emma. I feel we descend again. We have arrived. And as she spoke, the balloon sank rapidly, whilst the clouds opening discovered the immense square below them, the apparently paved with human heads.
"Oh, thank God we are not too late," said Elvira, clasping her hands together and sinking back upon her seat, whilst the balloon conductor directed the machine to the palace apparently appointed for the reception of the Queen. Elvira did not wait to arrange her dress, she did not wait to take refreshment, or even to rest a single moment from her fatigue, but rushed upon the terrace the instant she quitted the balloon, and presented herself before her astonished people, every limb quivering from the violence of her agitation. The crowd was immense. The extensive space looked one compact mass of human heads. But Elvira's courage did not fail her. Though she had now no Lord Edmund to support her, and no father applauding friends and listened as she spoke, yet the enthusiasm of the moment gave her strength. She forgot everything but the cause that brought her there, and her mind, thrown back upon its own resources, rallied its energies and seemed to gather courage from the thoughts, whilst her sylphic figure appeared to dilate in size and assume an awful dignity of the grandeur of the spirit that animated it. And thus she stood before her subjects, her life or death hanging upon their will. Her arrival had been thralled by the loudest shouts of wonder and joy, but when the multitude saw she wished to address them, the tumult was hushed, and they waited in breathless silence for her speech. The deep stillness that prevailed amongst this so lately bustling crowd of human beings, and the thought that every ear and every eye were turned towards her, slightly affected the nerves of Elvira, and her lips trembled as she began to speak. But as she became warmed by the subject, her voice gradually assumed its natural depth, melody, and sweetness, whilst its full tones sank into the hearts of her auditors and carried conviction as she went on. She first appealed to their gratitude, and after alluding to all she had done to secure peace and plenty to the domestic firesides, she reverted to the misery of her own situation, before the laws had been revoked that had condemned her to celibacy. She powerfully painted the harshness of the destiny that debarred her from the blessings she had so lessly bestowed upon others. She alone, of all her subjects, had been destined to the wretchedness of a solitary life, unsoothed by the tender cares of a husband, uncheered by the affection of children. She alone had been doomed to wither away her youth in cheerless widowhood. Their fiat had changed her destiny, but it was the part of a noble and generous people, whilst they conferred a benefit to encumber it with restrictions. No, she was confident the liberal spirit of the English would spurn the sordid idea, and shrink from such manner of obliging. "Make me free," she said. "Really, absolutely free. And I promise solemnly you shall never have occasion to blush for your queen."
As she spoke, her cheeks glowed, and her eyes sparkled with unwonted fire, whilst the people, struck by the suddenness of her appearance and her enthusiasm, and carried away by the force of her sentiments, they could metamorphose the tender, gentle Elvira into the exalted being before them, shouting applause, whilst cries rang soundly through the air of "Long live Elvira!" "Marry whomst you list, we shall still be your slaves. Still be our queen, and let your children and children's children reign over us, when ye shall be no more." Delight danced in the bright eyes of Elvira, and a blush of pleasure mantled on her cheeks, and she gracefully thanked him.
"And yet, my friends," she continued in a fainter voice, "there's another privilege I would demand at your hands. I am called free and absolute, yet I am chained by the law. Unloose these bands, and give me at least the power to pardon. I know that if I wished it, I might reverse these laws at my will, as the power of the queen that made them was not greater than which you have bestowed upon me. But I wish not to do so. I'd rather accept that from your hands as a favor which I might exact aright. Give me, then, my people, the most blessed attribute of royalty. Let me pardon. Can you refuse this?"
"No, no!" shouted the people with enthusiasm.
We are your slaves. Do with us as you wish. The laws are yours, and though you change them at your pleasure, we will obey. Long live Elvira! Elvira forever! From henceforth we owe no law but her will. Elvira's rapture was unbounded. She forgot the unstable nature of the Vox Populi and triumphed in the devotion of her people, whilst they, in return, shouted forth her praise as she warmly expressed her gratitude in tumultuous transports. The air rang with acclamations, and Elvira, looking proudly round upon her obsequious subjects, felt herself indeed a queen. There is perhaps no sensation in the world more delightful than thus to feel oneself the idol of the multitude, to see every eye beaming with admiration, to hear every voice resounding praise, and to know every heart is devoted to one subject. The human mind cannot enjoy a higher gratification than in the consciousness of power. Whilst the man thus exalted seems raised to the level of divinity and triumph in the worship of his fellow creatures, but alas, such glory is too much for mortals, and nothing can be more evanescent, or rather, nothing more certain prelude to disgrace. Elvira, however, knew not that her popularity was too great to be lasting. She implicitly believed her people would continue to feel what they now expressed, and, catching the spirit of the moment, she persuaded them to sign an abolition of the laws, and the confirmation of her absolute power. The people obeyed with rapture. The enthusiasm that animated them had not yet abated, and even if Elvira had desired their lives, they would have obeyed. They considered her inspired, and it seemed sacrilege to hesitate to comply with her demands. So powerful was the energy of a woman's will, and so sure was it that a determined spirit may overcome any difficulties when once roused resolutely to exert itself. Such also was the influence of beauty and eloquence upon the human mind, and so weak is judgment when attacked through the medium of the senses. In the meantime, the council of Elvira had met in their usual apartment, and were holding a solemn consultation, previous to going to receive the petitions, on the propriety of addressing the people whom they might be assembled in the square, respecting the illness and consequent incapacity for reigning the queen.
"I'm thinking as I think, as I am confident everyone here must think," said Lord Gustavus de Montfort. "There is no middle course to be pursued. A regency must be appointed, or the government will be overturned."
"There is no doubt we can exist without a regency," said Lord Doodle.
Yes, we must have a regency," cried Lord Doodle.
"It appears to me, to say the least of it, premature," observed the Duke of Essex, a highly respectable nobleman who had hitherto observed a cautious neutrality. "I think before deciding upon an important question, we should at least examine Her Majesty's physicians, as be guided by the report."
"His Grace is right," said Lord Doodle. "We ought to examine the physicians," said Lord Doodle. "One of them has just entered the council chamber," observed Lord Gustavus. "I presume he brings us usually daily bulletin of Her Majesty's health. Is it your pleasure, my lords, that he be examined?"
"By all means," cried the noble lord simultaneously, and Dr. Hardman advanced.
"How is Her Most Gracious Majesty?"
asked Lord Gustavus with his usual solemnity. "Alas, my lord," said Dr. Hardman, "Her Majesty is slept badly, and is much worse this morning." "Is she still delirious?" asked the Duke of Essex. "Quite, your Grace," returned the doctor, shaking his head.
"Then I fear there's no hope," said the Duke.
"None," said Lord Doodle, shaking his head.
"None," echoed Lord Doodle, shaking his head. "Thinking as I think, and as I am sure everyone here must think," said Lord Gustavus, "we must not suffer the interests of the people to be invaded with impunity. The Constitution requires watching over, and I consider this a matter that ought to be inquired into."
"Then you think the senses of the Queen irrecoverable?" asked the Duke of Essex, addressing Dr. Hardman.
"Not
Irrecoverable, I hope, my Lord Duke, replied the doctor, though I own her delirium is alarming. What does she rave about? Asked Lord Doodle, curiously, being the only mark he ever gave his being a rational animal. It is a delicate subject, returned the doctor, and if your lordships will excuse me... Oh, no, you must tell us, said Lord Doodle. Thinking as I think, and as I'm sure everyone else ought to think, said Lord Scazaus, concealment in this case would be a crime. Since your lordships command me, said the doctor, however reluctant I may be to betray her majesty's secrets, it is my duty to obey. The queen raves incessantly of Prince Ferdinand. I feared as much, said the Duke of Essex. And do you think she recovers she'll want to marry him? Asked Lord Doodle. I fear it cannot be doubted, my lord, returned the doctor. Thinking as I think, and as every free-born Englishman ought to think, said Lord Scazaus, she will forfeit her crown. A deep silence followed this daring speech, yet no one assented to it. No one attempted to contradict it. In fact, every man seemed afraid of committing himself, for though everyone thought Lord Gustavus would not have ventured so far, had he not felt assured a party against the Queen was strong, yet no one liked to be the first to declare himself her opponent. The awkward pause was broken by the entrance of Sir Ambrose, and Father Morris, who came with a message from the Duke of Cornwall, imploring them not to decide upon any measure hastily, and informing them that on the following day his physicians assured him he would be able to assist the deliberations in person.
We all esteem and respect the Duke, said Lord Gustavus, but thinking as I think, and as I am confident every one who hears me must think, not even our respect for him ought to induce us to consent that the Queen should marry a foreigner. No, no, we must let private feelings make us risk the interests of the people.
I did not say there was any danger. I dare say there will not be in any danger, murmured the soft, insinuating voice of Father Morris. I dare say they will run no risk. Foreigners have sometimes been known to respect the interests of the people, and reign as gloriously as the native-born monarchs.
Not often, I believe, Father, said Sir Ambrose. At any rate, I am sure it would break the Duke's heart to see his daughter married to Prince Ferdinand, and I am sure it would break mine to see him King of England. Weak, silly Elvira, I cannot account for her infatuation, and I have no patience with her, for causing all this misery solely for her folly.
You use strong language, Sir Ambrose, said the Duke of Essex.
Not stronger than the occasion requires, my Lord Duke, returned the worthy baronet. I have known the Queen from her childhood, and loved her as a daughter, but now...
A matter must certainly be inquired into, said Lord Gustavus. It is the duty of every well-disposed patriotic Englishman not to suffer the slightest invasion of the Constitution. Our laws are our bulwarks. We ought to die to defend our laws, and if the Queen be no longer in a fit state to administer them, or if she is contemptuous to design the putting an administration of them into the hands in which the purity may be contaminated, then, thinking as I think, and as I feel confident every individual who hears me must think, or at least ought to think, there can remain only one course for us to pursue. Perhaps, said Father Morris, we may be deceived, and the delirium of the Queen may be transient, or at least our mentioning the name of Prince Ferdinand in her ravings quite accidental. It is not well to be rash.
Oh, no, Reverend Father.
Oh, no, Reverend Father, replied Lord Gustavus. You deceive yourself. Your abstraction from the world and the goodness of your heart lead you to judge too favorably of others. But we, who know the world, see deeper. You, Holy Father, can form no idea of the folly of human passions. You are above their weaknesses, and cannot suspect that another which you are incapable of feeling yourself. But, as I said before, that we know the world and see deeper. Elvira is in love with Prince Ferdinand, and is quite capable of sacrificing her throne and the people for caprices of a romantic passion.
Impossible,
cried Father Morris, with well-acted astonishment.
Is very true, notwithstanding,
said Lord Gustavus, shaking his head sagaciously, whilst his attendant satellites... that's not another one. Is very true, notwithstanding, said Lord Gustavus, shaking his head sagaciously, while his attendant satellites, Lord Noodle and Doodle, shook theirs for sympathy.
Impossible, cried Lord Ambrose. She cannot surely carry her infatuation to such a height. She is too noble. But even if she is mad, will no one step forward to save her from destruction?
I do not see how anyone can save her, if such is her intentions, said the Duke of Essex. Women are proverbially self-willed, and now that the people have put the laws into her own hands...
The people were cajoled to consent, exclaimed Lord Gustavus.
But if the Queen be so mad as to intend to marry the Prince, she must lose her throne and suffer death, for the laws against foreigners remain inexorable.
Yes, the laws are inexorable, echoed Lords Doodle and Noodle.
Good heaven, cried Sir Ambrose. Is it possible I am in England, and yet hear such barbarous sentiments openly avowed? No one has more right to feel anger at the folly of Elvira than myself. But even I cannot bear such cruelty. What is a young and beautiful woman, and the very flower of her age, to be doomed to destruction, merely for having shown a susceptible heart? Forbid it, heaven! And what are we to dare judge so harshly and refuse mercy to a fellow creature? Are we not all feeble? Do we not all err? And if we show such cruelty in judging such a trifling offence, how shall we expect mercy for our own more weighty ones? Have mercy, then. Let us show ourselves men. Let us dare to exert our reason and show off shackles of prejudice. We boast that the law will in this case makes us free, and are armed with power against our sovereign. Let us use that power, then, and show that we really free by daring to act justly. If we do not, we are slaves.
It cannot be, said Lord Gustavus. You talk well, Sir Ambrose, but words are nothing against facts. If the Queen intend to marry Prince Ferdinand, she must either be insane or intend to subvert the Constitution, and in either case, thinking as I think, and as I am sure every reasonable person in the kingdom must think, she is no longer competent to reign, and is no longer worthy to live. Eloquence is a fine thing, and I do not deny that the worthy baronet speaks fluently, yet notwithstanding all he can say, or indeed all that he can be said, upon the subject, law is law. Yes, law is law, repeated the words. Sir Ambrose, I thank you for my soul, cried the old Duke of Cornwall, starting from the midst of the crowd. You have indeed proved yourself my friend, but I should blush to think that my daughter was slandered in my presence, and that I left it to another to undertake her defence. Yes, gentlemen, Elvira is slandered. I will venture my life upon her innocence. Her heart is English, my lords, thoroughly English. She will marry no German. No, my poor dear Elvira never dreamed of such a thing. She is innocent. And here the poor man, overpowered by his emotions, could not precede them, but leaning upon the shoulder of his friend Sir Ambrose, wept bitterly. It is hard to see the tears of aged men, and everyone was affected. They had started with the sudden appearance of the Duke amongst them, for his gaunt looks and wasted form, aided by his belief in his serious tones, gave him more an aspect of spectre than of man. And now his trembling voice, the grey hairs, as he attempted to vindicate his child, came home to the hearts of his auditors.
Alas, why is not Edmund here? Sighed Sir Ambrose. He would not have left the cause of Elvira to such feeble hands. But he is gone, and wretched father that I am, I may soon no longer possess my darling boy. 6 months ago my 2 brave sons were the pride of my heart, and the admiration of every eye. Where are they now? One is wandering in foreign climes, exposed to every misery of want, and the other is confined to a prison and doomed to suffer an ignominious death. Alas, alas, has my life been spared to endure such misery? Whilst the old man thus lamented, a bustle was heard amongst the crowd,
and the noble lords of whom it was composed, dividing, made way for Elvira. With glowing cheeks and sparkling eyes, the queen walked proudly among the lane made for her, having a roll of parchment in her hand, and with dignity took her seat upon the vacant throne. A solemn silence prevailed. The conspirators were awed by the sudden appearance of their sovereign, and those had hitherto remained neutral or surprised stood hesitating, unknowing how to act. Elvira paused for a few seconds, sternly surveying the crowd, and finding that no one attempted to speak, she exclaimed, "How now, my lords? What means this silence? I came to assist your councils, not to interrupt them. Go on, I pray you, for surely such enlightened senators can have no sentiments they fear to breathe before their queen." "We were surprised at your sudden appearance, your majesty," said the Duke of Essex, "as, from the report of your majesty's physicians, we feared your majesty's illness." "My illness was of the mind, my lord Duke," said Elvira, "and this is the medicine that has cured it. Look, my lords," continued she, unrolling the parchment she carried, and suddenly flashing it before their eyes. "Behold my panacea. Now am I, indeed, a queen, for my people have made me absolute, and abolishing all laws have placed their lives and fortunes at my feet." Lord Gustavus and his adherents stood aghast, gazing upon the queen and the parchment she held so triumphantly, without the power of uttering a word. "Ere this," continued the queen, "the purport of this parchment has received some 1,000 signatures, yet I do not wish to abuse my powers. Go, my lords, I no longer have occasion for your counsels. When I have, I shall summon you." The dignified manner in which Elvira waved her hand as she said this prevented reply, and the lord of the councils dispersed, without daring utter a single syllable. The Duke and Sir Ambrose alone remained. "My dear father!" cried Elvira, throwing her arms round his neck, whilst the overstrained feelings had so long supported her gave way, and she sobbed in agony upon his shoulder. "Remove her to my chamber." No. Remove her to her chamber," said Dr. Coleman, who now appeared. "This agitation will destroy her. Her exhausted frame is not able to endure it." In fact, the queen was now completely overpowered, and she was carried off by Emma and her attendants in violent hysterics. Lord Maysworth had not been present at the scene, for his time had been otherwise engaged, and to explain what occupied him, it will be necessary to go back to the prison of Prince Ferdinand. It may be recollected, when Cheops removed Clara, he had informed the prince that Lord Maysworth and Father Murphy would be with him in a few hours. The mummy's information was correct, for at the appointed time they came. "Oh," said Father Murphy, "and where's Clara? So they've let me in after all, you see, and for knowing Lord Maysworth was her friend, I went to consult him, and he talked to them, and tell them how barbarous it was to deny a poor fellow that was just going to be burnt alive the consolations of religion. They hadn't the heart to refuse me." "Oh," groaned Prince Ferdinand, "is there no hope of escape?" "I fear not," said Lord Maysworth, "for, notwithstanding the enormous expense of attending public executions, the people are so fond of them that it is necessary to indulge them now and then, and they are so devoted to Lord Edmund that his adversary has no chance. Besides, they say there are plenty of witnesses to prove that you have addressed the most impassioned language to the Queen. Your enthusiasm one night at her singing." "I remember," cried Prince Ferdinand. "Idiot that I was! Oh, curses on my folly!" "Ah, that's right," exclaimed Father Murphy. "Indulge yourself a little, my honey, and it will do you well. I don't know a prettier amusement than cursing and swearing, and finding fault in one's own trouble, and I'd be far from denying ye a little harmless indulgence, for you're to die soon. It would be cruel, to not let you have all the consolation you can get hold of." "Oh," exclaimed Prince Ferdinand, "I'm the most wretched of human beings." "And you may say that, for I don't see any great hope you have in respect to that the people must have a victim, and they'd like you better than Lord Edmund. But never mind that, for the worst that can happen after all, that you'll be roasted alive." "Oh!" cried Prince Ferdinand, not much consoled by this encouraging speech. "Why, cried Hans. And nothing can be done, for thought roasting alive may be the worst that can happen. I don't think my master is such an amateur in cookery as to wish to try the experiment. Oh, said Father Murphy, and I'm quite of your opinion, and so if the prince would just try, and get ready a word or two of defence, or if some clever person that knows the world like your lordship, for instance, would give him a word or two of advice, the thing would be entirely done and all right. Oh, cried the prince, clasping his hands together, save me, I implore you to save me. I will do all I can, said Lord Maysworth, smiling most graciously. Rely upon me, Prince. The suggestion of the Holy Father shall be attended to. The gratitude I owe your father demands my greatest exertions, and I am most happy to have the opportunity of serving his son. This worthy father's plan is excellent. A wonder it did not strike me before. Confide securely in me, Prince. A proper defence shall be prepared, and I think it will help you to escape. So saying, he retired, leaving Prince Ferdinand somewhat consoled by his assurances, but by no means reconciled even to the possibility of being roasted alive. The intermediate time between this conversation and the day fixed for the trial of the prince was spent by Lord Maysworth in preparing, with the assistance of those learned by law, this defence, and when it was finished his rapture was beyond description. 3 times did he read over it with still increasing satisfaction, for, as he considered it his own production, he regarded it with all the true yet indescribable rapture of a doting parent. We are all so fond of our own children, whether of mind or of body, regarding them as emanations of ourselves, upon which we may indulge our self-love without the grossness of undistinguished vanity, that the transport of Lady Maysworth is not surprising, though he actually carried it so far that, notwithstanding he professed attachment and gratitude to the German emperor, I believe if he means procuring the prince's escape he had offered to him, he would rather have let himself stay the risk of being burned alive, than have lost the pleasure he anticipated on hearing the delivery of his speech. The important day arrived, and the prince, accompanied by his faithful Hans and Lord Maysworth, proceeded to the court, the latter carrying his beloved brief in his own pocket, rightly considering it as far too estimable to be entrusted to any other hands than his. The court was crowded to an excess, for strange tales of the passion and the illness of the queen had gone forth into the world, each edition more wonderful than that which went before it, and the people now thronged to see the prince with that extraordinary feeling so common amongst English, which makes them stare at a great man in much the same way as they would a wild beast. I am out of pauses, so we will have to take a side break. So I will see you in a few. So I'd forgotten that chapter 28 was 25 pages long. We only have 9 left. So I'm going to finish this chapter, and then we're probably going to be done for the night. So anyway. An automaton judge sat with great dignity upon the magnificent throne, looking, though a little heavy, quite as wise and sagacious as judges are wont to look. A real jury, that is, a jury of flesh and blood, was ranged upon one side of him, and some automaton counsel sat in front, their briefs lying upon the table before them, and having behind each a clerk to wind him up when he should be wanted to speak. It being found that the profession of the law gives such an amazing volubility of words that it is dangerous to wind up a counsel too soon, lest they should go off in the wrong place, and so disturb the silence of the court. In different parts of these counsel were holes, into which the briefs being put into were gradually ground into pieces, the counsel being wound up, till they came forth in words as a mouth. Also, the language in which the counsel pleaded depended entirely upon the hole into which the brief was put, there being a different one for every possible tongue. Future British legal system. All now was ready. The prisoner with his friends placed themselves at the bar, and the judge and jury prepared to hear and decide all with the due decorum. The signal to begin was given, and the brief for the Crown being put into the English department of the Council, appointed to conduct the prosecution, the clerk began to wind away, and in a few minutes the Council burst forth in the following impassioned strain of eloquence. My lord and gentlemen of the jury, it is with feelings of the utmost unfeigned regret that I must now rise to address you. Sensible, oh, how deeply sensible, of my insufficiency, and of this greater competency of any one of my learned brethren at the bar, how willingly would I rein the task to any one of those eloquent gentlemen, feeling so indisputably convinced, as I do, of their eminent talents and of their merit, and of their great, how much greater fitness for an undertaking of this magnitude than myself. Es was mit uns, sehr unwillen, cried Hans. If thou art unfit to the task, I wonder why the deuce they employed thee. Peace, fool, said the prince. Do you not see that this is the only exordium? These are the words of course. The orator had paused for an instant from some error in his machinery. But his clerk setting him in motion again, he went on as follows. But having disputed an act, I will not shrink from the arduous duty imposed upon me. I will, therefore, state the principal points of the case, prove my facts by witness, and then leave the decision to the well-known judgment and penetration of the enlightened and intellectual tribunal before me. Here it was intended the counsel should bow to the court, but owing to his defective machinery, he only gave a kind of jerk, and then continued. My lord and gentlemen, it sometimes falls upon the lot of members of my profession to relate the astounding circumstances and soul-harrowing facts that pierce into the inmost souls of their auditors, and rend the tortured spirits of their iron fangs, as the teeth of the tangible harrow pierce into and rend asunder the clods of inanimate earth over which it is dragged. But what I shall have to tell you, gentlemen, will make even facts like these hide their diminished heads, and run skulking into the corners like owls trembling, and flying hooting away on being exposed to the scorching glare of the noonday sun. Do you not tremble, gentlemen? Do not your hearts pant breathless expectation of what is coming? Indulge your anticipations, bid fancy while their wildest flight, and let imagination conjure up all the horrors of the infernal regions. Paint the angel of death hovering upon the leathern wings over a devoted city, and shrieking mothers imploring mercy in vain for their murdered children. Paint all the manipulated horrors of famine, fire, carnage. Paint miserable, starving wretches, screaming wildly for food, and, in the agonies of despair, gnawing the flesh from their own withering bones. Paint flames surrounding their pointed arms, and helpless family crying in bitter anguish for the aid that cannot be afforded them. Paint witches celebrating their detested Sabbath. Imagine demons indulging in their infernal revels. Yes, paint and picture to yourself these and 10,000 other horrors, each more frightful than the last. Dwell upon them. Let them haunt your imaginations. But whatever you may fancy, picture, or paint, nothing can ever equal the horror you will feel when you learn the crime which the prisoner at the bar stands accused. Know, then, my tongue falters as I speak, and my quivering lips almost refuse to give utterance to the appalling sounds. Know that he has dared, impiously and presumptuously dared, to fall in love with the Queen. I see your indignation at such baseness. I feel the virtuous shame that burns upon your cheek. Yes, yes, my friends. I too am an Englishman, and I, like you, spurn the disdain, like thoughts submitting to a stranger. What do we want with a king? Has not the country been happy, prosperous, flourishing, respected at home, and honored abroad under the dominion of a queen? Yes, yes, my friends, it has, and under her gentle sway the murderous weapon of war has been converted into a plowshare, and nodding helmet and ponderous corselet into a peaceful wig and graceful crown, and the grim aspect of frowning ruin and grinning desolation into the gentle smiles of benignant face and overwhelming plenty. Long, long may gentle peace continue to shed her benignant smiles upon us. Long, long may we sit beneath the grateful shade of her olive branches. Long, long, long may the feathery foliage hang in gracious festoons above our heads, and their pale green wreaths encircle our brows, for in the arms of peace lie joy, ease, and happiness. Her smile gives health and contentment, and her blessing wealth. And what threatens to affright this bewitching deity from our shores? 'Tis this audacious stranger who deserves the bitterest punishment for his unparalleled atrocity. But this is not all. Not satisfied with endeavoring to destroy the happiness of the queendom and overturn the laws enacted by the wisdom of our ancestors, he has done more. Yes, intolerable as his crimes have been, there is yet one more deadly behind. Shudder, my friends, and turn away your eyes as fear-inspiring words drop from my tongue. He has dared to draw arms within the precincts of the regional palace. Sufferable audacity! Hear this, ye shades of former royalty, and tremble in your Elysian groves at the profane hand that has dared thus to invade your august privileges. Can it be believed? Will after ages credit their report? Oh, no, no. The fact will appear too monstrous for even credulity itself to swallow. When the fatal crime was committed, earth trembled beneath his feet, the winds hushed their murmurs, and all nature stood aghast. Frightened oceans receded from its rocky bed. Pluto rushed shriveling from his nether throne, and Neptune waved in vain his tranquilizing trident. The elements were convulsed, lightning streamed from the swords of the combatants, and thunder rolled above their heads as they stood like two heroes of Arabian fiction, wielding the elements in their wrath. But I have done, my lord and gentlemen. I say no more, for I scorn the prejudice of your minds against the prisoner, or make the slightest appeal to your feelings to condemn him. However, this I must say, that if ever a case should rouse every nerve of true-born Englishman against it, it is this. Does any man dread to be torn from the calm delights of his comfortable fireside, where he was surrounded by his adoring wife and attentive children, and dooming to incur the wretchedness of misery and want? Let him condemn the prisoner. Does any man dread being dragged across burning sands, or forced to wade up to his knees in water through marshy deserts? Let him condemn the prisoner. Would any man shudder to be obliged to sleep upon the hard, cold ground, his limbs racked with rheumatism, his body exposed to all the vicissitudes of hunger, thirst, and inclement seasons, whilst his life is endangered every instant? Let him condemn the prisoner. But if ye prefer these horrors to the comforts of a warm down bed, or if ye enjoy the prospect of having his substance devoured by tax gatherers to support the expenses of a foreign war, then let the prisoner be acquitted. But unless he can make up his mind to undergo privileges like these, let him aid by his vote to condemn the wretch who... And here the orator stops abruptly, being quite gone down. He had indeed uttered his last words gradually slower and slower, and at lengthened intervals, because his attendant clerk had unfortunately given him a turn too little, and had not screwed him up quite tight enough. The witnesses were now called. Several spoke to the circumstance of the extravagant admiration expressed by the Prince of Elvira's singing, others disposed the fact of the combat, and others mentioned the Queen's sighing in abstraction. But the principal one distinctly stated that he had heard the Prince make the Queen an offer of his hand in the gardens of the Somerset House, and that she had consented to marry him if she could contain the consent of her people. A general thrill of indignation ran through the court at this evidence, and it was with difficulty the silence was obtained in the pleading of the defendant. At last all was still, and the attendant clerk began to wind up the counsel for the prince. Lord Maysworth watched for a moment, and being afraid to trust his beloved brief into the hands of his own, unfortunately in his agitation, he popped it into the wrong hole, and when the counsel began to speak, he burst forth in French. Words were wanted to express Lord Maysworth's unutterable consternation at this unfortunate accident. "Stop, stop!" cried him. "Hush, hush! Can anyone stop him? It's an inexorable counsel should stop. For once wound up, properly set in motion, all the powers of heaven and earth cannot stop him from he'd really run down." "What shall I do?" cried Lord Maysworth in an agony of despair. "For if the judge and jury don't understand French, my foreign oration will be utterly lost." "Oh, if that will be all," said the clerk, "your lordship need not distress yourself, for as soon as I have found what was going on, I ran up to the judge and pulled out his lordship's French stop." "And the gentlemen of the jury?" "Oh, they all understand French." "It is well," said Lord Maysworth, "though I am still sorry the whole happened to be French, for I am afraid the verbosity of the language may deteriorate the strength of my expressions." Thus muttered the noble lord, not sorry, however, I believe, if the whole truth were to be openly declared, that he had an excuse in the change of language for his failure of speech, if it should not happen to meet with the brilliant success that he felt so perfectly confident it deserved. The counsel, in the meantime, went on. The following is a translation of the speech. "My lord and gentlemen of the jury, it is with feelings of considerable diffidence and hesitation that I arise to address you. After the flood of eloquence that has poured from my learned brother, I, gentlemen, am not gifted with such enviable facility of speech, nor is my imagination endowed with that creative power he has so forcibly displayed. I cannot, gentlemen, like him. Uprear the club of Hercules, for what? To crush a butterfly, or brain a gnat. Nor have I the least intention of drawing either Neptune or Pluto from the quiet nap they have been taking for so many centuries to assist in our debate. I assure you also, gentlemen, that I shall neither disturb the ocean from its rocky bed, nor make nature stand aghast. No, my lord and gentlemen, my intentions are perfectly pacific, and your harassed imaginations may repose tranquilly upon my speech. After the tumultuous one of my learned brother, the way-worn traveller rests peacefully upon the soft green turf, after having been tossed about upon heaving billows of the tempestuous ocean. 'Tis sweet to rest from dread of danger free, and mark the billows of the foaming sea. 'Tis sweet a little skiff to urge through the tempestuous ocean's rolling surge, to hear the patternous rains against the roof, and feel your hospitable mansion-proof, but sweeter far by the troubled man's repose, when a speech like this it hears the close. When I listened to the powerful exertion of my learned friend, and I did listen to him with the most profound attention, I confess my imagination was too highly excited to be satisfied with so lame and important conclusion. What, cried I, have the laws of nature been reversed? Have demons been disturbed in their infernal revels? And witches called from their dusky caverns, merely because a beautiful woman was excited the tender passion of the breast of a youthful stranger? Is it so extraordinary an occurrence that it should create such excessive wonder? Are our hearts so dead to beauty that such a catastrophe should occasion surprise? Forbid it, heaven, no. Whilst our hearts still throb in our bosoms, may they ever be responsive to the attractions of the fair. May we never become insensible to the charms of the loveliest objects of creation. May we ever own their witchery and bend beneath their magic sway. For man, degraded man, would be sunk below the level of the brutes. View man as he degenerates secluded from an influence of female society. Is he not rough, though, brutal and unpolished? Does he not want all those winning graces and those delicate attentions that form so undeniably the charm and solace in life? In proposition as your sensibility, as our goodness, and all the best feelings of our nature are awakened, we become susceptible to love. It is indeed excessive sensibility and a kindly feeling to our fellow creatures that creates it. Does there exist a generous or noble mind that has not felt this passion? No, not one. There is indeed something generous and ennobling in it. We cannot prefer the welfare of another to our own, nor be completely absorbed in another's being, with the devotedness of true love, without being purified in our ideas, and raised from the disgusting selfishness which is ever the inspirer of base and mean actions. Yes, love indeed is light from heaven, a spark from that immortal fire, with angels shared and Allah given, to lift the earth our low desire. Devotion wafts the mind above, but heaven itself descends in love. And from this heavenly, this inspired feeling, shall my unfortunate client be debarred. Hear me, yet shades of heroic lovers, who, though dying for the hopeless object of your passion, have still exclaimed with the enthusiastic devotion of a modern poet. Lead on, through horror's weight, in awful fury round thy gate, and danger, death, and grim despair forbid my hopeless passage there. If love still smiling beckon on, the path is passed, the gate is won. And ye poets and philosophers, who have painted love as an oasis of the desert, the green spot in memory's waste, where affection still lingers even when hope decays, have you no compassion for my unhappy client, whose only fault was that she was beautiful, and he is not blind? And is this an offense for which a man deserves to be burnt alive? Forbid it, humanity, forbid it, mercy. No, no, such inhuman cruelty exists not in the breasts of Englishmen. I know, I feel that you must acquit my client on his head, but this is not the only charge brought against him. He is accused of having violated the sanctity of the royal palace by drawing his sword within its precincts. To describe the enormity of this crime, my learned friend has brought forward such an overwhelming torrent of eloquence that unhappily his meaning was swept away in the current of his words. At least I suppose so, as with all my industry I have been totally unable to find it. As, however, I cannot imagine my learned friend could be harangued so long without having some meaning in what he said, I suppose it has slipped undiscovered into some sly corner, where it lies, poor thing, quite concealed and almost crushed to death by the ponderous weight of metaphors heaped upon it. Gentlemen, my client drew his sword in the royal garden. This is a plain statement of fact, when stripped of the load of ornaments with which a learned friend has encumbered it. My client, a stranger to English laws and customs, chanced to be walking in a public garden belonging to the royal palace. He there met a nobleman of the court. From causes irrelevant to the question before us, high words took place between them. My client was grossly insulted in a manner impossible to be borne by a man calling himself a gentleman, or making at least pretensions to honor. He drew his sword to defend himself. Can anything be more simple? And yet for this all created nature thrown into confusion, and Neptune and Pluto called shivering from their beds. Gentlemen, my learned friend's brain was teeming with a monstrous conception, and longing to be delivered. He dragged it into speech with which we have been favored. Not satisfied with piercing us with the fangs of a metal arrow, plunging us into disasters of war, and disgracing our imaginations by exhibiting the combined effects of plague, pestilence, and famine, he has entangled in his snares these unfortunate deities, whom he has forced the upper earth to bear witness on his behalf. I am afraid very much against their wills. Nothing, indeed, can be more distressing than to see an unfortunate thought thus hunted through the meanderings of a sentence. A crowd of meaning words, like a pack of hungry dogs, pressing close at its back, till at last worn out and completely exhausted, it sinks feebly away and gives up the ghost so quietly that no one can reasonably imagine what can possibly become of it. Thus it was the argument of my learned friend. It has vanished amidst the bustle he created around it. One more thing, my lord and gentlemen, and I have done, for I shall not, like my learned friend, after disclaiming all intentions of appealing to your feelings, endeavor by the artful perforation to come home to your inmost souls. It is simply this, that my client is a stranger, the son of a powerful monarch, and of course he has never taken any oath of allegiance to the English government. He is not amenable to English laws. After stating this fact, I sit down, confidently assured that your verdict will be in my favor, and that by it you will again vindicate that proud right you have so long and gloriously remained of acting always as enlightened and reborn Englishmen. As the orator sat down, a tumult of applause rang through the hall, and the delight of Lord Maysworth can only be justly appreciated by the author who recollects what he felt when he first heard the success of his favorite work. But he had little time for exultation, as the judge, having been wound up in his turn, now began to sum up the evidence. Slowly and heavily did he go on, the machinery that composed him wanting oil, and creaking ominously as it moved. While ere he had half finished, a cry was heard in the outer court, and instantly a rush of people announced the arrival of the Queen. After the exertions made by Elvira the previous day, her fever returned, and she lay insensible to everything that passed till she was restored to recollection by the tolling of a deep-toned bell, which was always set in motion the moment a prisoner was put on his defense. She heard the solemn sound distinctly. The court where state criminals were tried had joined the palace, in order that the Queen might have an opportunity of hearing appeals, or deciding on any difficult case that might arise. Though the offences against the state have been very rare in the female dynasty, whether from the goodness of the people or the severity of the punishment, I leave it to the readers to determine. The privilege had been seldom called into action, and the bell now grated harshly as it tolled. Elvira, however, had heard of the custom, and its cause flashed instantly upon her mind, and she started from her bed, and listened to the solemn sound as it fell slowly and heavily upon her ear, every knell seeming to strike upon the naked nerve. "Emma," she cried, "let me go! Quick, let me save him, or I shall be too late!" Emma obeyed, whilst she was tiring her mistress every moment seemed an age, and Elvira listened to the heavy tolling till the sense of hearing barely came agony, and unable to endure any more, she pressed her hands firmly against her ears to shut out the dreaded sound. At length she was ready, and hurrying to the court, arrived at the critical moment I have mentioned. "Stop!" she cried. "I command you to stop proceedings. The prisoner is free. My people have given me the right to pardon all offenses, and are thus first exercised. Set him free." The guards obeyed, and did not possible being to stop the The guards obeyed, and it not being possible to stop the automaton judge till he wound down, he carried out the court, repeating, for it happened to be summing up the evidence of the moment, and the queen said she loved him, and would sacrifice even her life for his sake. "You are free, sir," said Elvira to the prince. "I only blush that a stranger that should have been inhospitably treated in my country. My illness, however, must plead my excuse, and I only now show my sorrow for releasing you from parole of honor you have given. You are absolutely free, prince, not only from these chains, but also to leave the kingdom whenever you think shall fit." The prince, in a transport of gratitude, knelt and kissed her hand, and then retired with his friends to the house of Lord Maysworth, whilst Elvira, satisfied with herself, and hoping she had disarmed scandal by desiring the prince to quit the kingdom, returned to her palace, more happy than she had felt since before the fatal combat in the garden. I'm glad that wasn't all Cheops. Now I need to find someone to raid. I know it's a Harp Griffin come on, but he was doing a short stream, I think. Yeah, she's already off. Smetsu. And Legacy. Dusk is on. Where am I hearing music? If anyone has raid suggestions, feel free to just kind of toss them out there. Wait a minute, that's my music, isn't it? Oh, it is. I'd forgotten I added music in the bookstore. Ouch. Let's see. Oh, we got that one. Nope, not. So yeah, well, Excellent. Pick the raid message of choice. And hopefully, I will see you tomorrow for some fairy tales. So, have a good night.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist. Lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breeze a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book, let the pages fall. You've roamed the winding paths, now heed the twilight.